Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm so glad that you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers. Well, we enjoy award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's actually captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine to do it, but this is real true crime and real wine. In each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on all your favorite podcast platforms. So each week you can join us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. Well, she joins me and we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world while we enjoy our favorite wines. Doesn't get any better than that. Wine and crime. So this week I've got my favorite Casaro wine, our True Crime and Wine Red Blend. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for our podcast version of True Crime and Wine. In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling into the life and crimes of Patrick MacKay, a psychotic killer who often preyed on elderly women, but whose victims range from a 4-year-old to a 92-year-old. And I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a strange case because we have no real pattern to the victimology here. And from an early age, he was diagnosed as a psychopathic killer. And one teacher even described him as he has the potential to murder women. How do you catch a guy like this?
So my first thought is diagnosed at a young age. I mean, what do? Just lock them up as children? You want them to flourish in society. You want them to do well. How do you stop someone who's diagnosed like this as a child?
Yeah, and I want to get back to the teacher and her quote as we get into the show, because I got one of the most fascinating studies I've ever seen has been from a teacher who picked up on the nuances of her 5-year-old and 6-year-old students and predicted which ones would go to prison.
Okay, John, so today we are talking about Patrick David MacKay, born September 25th, 1952 in London, England. So going across the pond for this one. He still remains in prison as of today. He is a British serial killer convicted of 3 murders, but confessed to 11 of them. But he is also suspected in up to 13 or more between 1973 and 1975. And he is also known, John, as the devil's disciple for his Nazi fascination and brutal attacks, often on elderly women and a priest.
Yeah, that's what was so hard about this. Like we said in the opening, Brandy, this guy had no real victimology. So you talk about a psychopathic killer, an opportunistic killer, opportunistic in that sometimes he followed these victims home and would attack them. And as we're going to learn later on, he didn't kill every victim. Matter of fact, he was suspected in many, many, many more robberies, muggings, purse snatchings. But if the victim didn't make him mad, sometimes he simply walked away. Sometimes he asked for a glass of water before walking away. So really different, interesting type of killer like we try to profile here on True Crime and Wine, the podcast, from his actions, what he did and how he did it.
So we always look at the early life, right? So those things you're talking about, the muggings, things that may have not even come up until after his arrest and conviction. But we always look at the early life. And with this guy, as we know, and we mentioned in the opening, he was diagnosed at a very young age as a psychopath. But in his early life, he was abandoned. I think that's the best word to use here. He was born to Harold, who was an accountant, so a father who was working a profession, and Miriam MacKay, she was from a Guyanese Creole descent. So he grew up in Dartford, Kent. He had two sisters, but he did suffer physical abuse from his alcoholic father, was not doing well in school, had poor academic performance, and he also was a bully. So definitely seeing some of these early signs and predecessors to what's to come.
Yeah, and we always do look at that because as we go down our checklist, we can start saying, and so starting off with the abusive father, and that his father really determined the pattern for his life. And what I mean by that is he was abused by the father. He was traumatized when his father died at just age 10, and that's traumatizing for anyone. Can you imagine? I mean, that's just unbelievable. My parents lived to a very old age. My grandparents lived to a very old age. I can't imagine being 10 and losing your parent. But with Patrick, I think he already had the precursors and was suffering the mental health issues. And so I don't know if it's like he snapped, but it certainly pushed him over the edge. And what I mean by that is we know his dad died of a heart attack at age 10, but he never accepted his dad's death. Matter of
Yeah.
fact, he denied his dad's death and kept a photo of his father with him at all times. He never attended his dad's funeral. Again, not too abnormal. We see this. We have parents that ask the kids, do you want to go? Do you
Yep.
not want to go? How far do you want to participate? But in his case, although he never acknowledged his father's death, he assumed his father's role in the family, which included beating his mother and his sisters. I found
Mm.
that I don't know if I've seen that in any other case.
Yeah, it's very unusual well, I see, like you mentioned, the trauma of losing your father, but he beats him, right? He was an abusive father to him,
Right.
but there still is that attachment, right? That all children have, and then he doesn't attend the funeral, maybe because, like you said, maybe there's sadness, or maybe he didn't want to see his dad, in that manner, and wanted to remember him like he was, but then to assume the abuse, to take it over and fill that role. I don't know, John, that's really hard. It's almost like what his father was doing to him was an acceptable behavior in the home.
Yeah. And we know that a very high percentage of children that are abused become abusers.
That's right.
But I can't think of another case where it went this far. They usually abuse their children and grandchildren. He took it the other direction.
Yep.
He abused his mother and his sibling. And so, again, we always try to find really unique, really fascinating cases for you. I really haven't come across this where the son assumed the dad's persona to the point that he started abusing his mother and his sister. Very,
Yeah.
very strange.
Well, there is clear abuse in the house because police are called several times a week, John, 4 or 5 times a week, including when he threw his mother and sister out of the house.
Yeah, he actually physically threw them out of the house. They called the police, and the police were kind of astounded, like, you're the mom.
Yeah.
And he threw them out, and the police had to get the mom and sister back in. He attempted at one point to kill a younger boy. He was first institutionalized. So you can really see that father's death at 10, and now we're starting with this abuse, and now it's getting really escalated. And then at 13, they finally institutionalized him for setting a Catholic church on fire.
Yeah.
And certainly there was some issues with the church and the priest and the religion, as we're going to see, later on. But get this, Brandy, they had to physically remove him from the home and place him in institutions and prisons 18 times
Mm.
from 12 to 22.
Wow.
That's like twice a year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so literally every time they let him out, he
Mhm.
does something or commits an offense, and they re-institutionalize him.
Well, I would wonder, John, is it just not getting the right help? I mean, it's 10 years of your life. You're institutionalized 18 different times, diagnosed young as a possible psychopath, future women murderer. I mean, I don't know. Is there medicine to even fix that? Or do they not know what to do with him? I have to wonder. It's once every 6 months is
Yeah,
basically.
are they letting him out,
Yep.
and then he just is acting up again, and not just acting up. I mean, some of the red flags that certainly his doctors saw, whether the police noticed it or not, is his animal cruelty. We know about his violence and abuse of his mother, his sister, assuming the dad's role in animal cruelty. And we see that. That's a common precursor with serial killers. But he would tear the wings off of birds.
Mm.
And you know what that tells me, Brandy? When I look at that from a profiling standpoint,
Mhm.
it's not about the murder. I can already see it's not about the killing of the birds, because when you tear wings off of birds, are they still alive? Yeah. So
Yes.
it's about the torture. It's
Yep.
about the pain. It's about victimizing. And so we've seen all different kinds of animal abuse with these cases, including the one serial killer who killed his daughter's cat and laughed
Mhm.
about it in front of her. We've seen all kinds of animal abuse, with my serial killer killing animals and stripping the fur off them, stripping the feathers off them,
Mhm.
and then throwing them in neighbors' yards. But tearing the wings off of birds is a unique form of torture that he's experimenting with. So that's obviously a huge red flag. He had frequent tantrums, violent outbursts. We can see that. It's almost like that killer we profiled not too long ago, where he'd look in women's eyes, and if he saw evil, he'd kill them.
Yeah.
If people made him mad, he would fly into a rage, and somebody even described him like a little terrorist. So
Mm.
we can certainly see it. 12, 15, 18.
Mhm.
This is setting up for a bad life.
Well, we've got arson as well. You mentioned that,
Yep.
lighting fires, the animal cruelty. John, at just age 15 in 1967, a psychiatrist by the name of Leonard Carr diagnosed him as a psychopath and predicted that he was going to be a cold psychopathic killer. And a
Yeah.
teacher called him a potential murderer of women at 15 years old, John.
Wow. And okay, I can see that with the psychiatrist, right?
Hmm.
They're professionals. They see the behavior. They're seeing the animal abuse and the torture and the abuse at home. They're seeing the violence. They're seeing the outburst. And yeah, okay, I've seen 15-year-olds, and I can look in their eye and tell you, this is a cold psychopathic killer. And I've told you different stories that I've seen that on the street over and over again. Here's what really interests me, and I want to get into this a minute. A teacher said he had, quote, the potential to murder women. And I think that's interesting to me, because one of the most fascinating studies that I've ever read in law enforcement was actually published by a teacher. This guy, for 30 years, was a kindergarten teacher. the author of this article I'm talking about. And for 30 years, he kept a little personal notebook of the actions and behaviors of his students because he really felt that at a young age, he could predict which ones would end up in prison.
Okay.
We're talking about 5 and 6 years old.
Yes.
And he kept this running document, which ended up for his PhD work, became his longitudinal study. 30 years, that's a great study. And he, with about 80+%, was able to predict which one of those students
Wow.
were going to end up in prison.
80% is high.
Yeah, I mean that is a real indicator that we can pick up on young kids. And if the teachers are picking up on it, how can we get those kids into treatment even earlier? Right?
Right.
How can we provide services for them before we have to provide sanctions? And, I don't know, with this serial killer, maybe it was already too late. By age 10, he lost his father. By 12, he was committing these crimes. 13, he's setting fire to a church. He's abusing his mother. He's abusing his sisters. He's torturing animals. But we always talk about nature versus nurture. Was he wired wrong? And then all these things happened and it's a combination. But I just find it really interesting when I was researching this, when a teacher picked out he has the potential for murder. Could you imagine going to a parent-teacher conference, Brandy?
We have them tomorrow, John. So let's hope it's good news, right? No, but yeah, well, I mean, I think it's because the teacher picked up on the behaviors that he showed to girls in the class. I mean, maybe it was the look he gave them. Maybe it was the way he engaged with them. I mean, I think something, and she specifically says women, older and girls. And, so I think it's easy to pick up on some of those things when you see kids every single day like teachers do.
Right, and spend a lot of time with them. So I can see where the psychologist would diagnose it. I just found it really fascinating that really at a young age a teacher did too. And sorry, didn't try to make it that contemporary. I didn't know you had a parent-teacher conference tomorrow. So hopefully when you go to the conference,
Fingers crossed.
You're not going to get a warning about, Brandy.
No. If I do, I'll let you know, and you can let me know what I need to do from this point
there
forward.
You go. That's a whole nother podcast.
You can start profiling for me, and we'll see what steps need to be taken.
That's a whole nother podcast. Man, maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to bring profilers into the parent-teacher sessions.
Oh, my gosh.
No, but really, and profiling sometimes has gotten a bad rep, but it's really observation, right? It's observation, it's note taking, it's pattern recognition, and that's what our teachers are doing. That's what our teachers are doing. And really that's a big part of their job. How do I tailor the curriculum to individual students, because they all come from different backgrounds, all come from different experiences, and how do I give them something educational? So, but that's another whole podcast. Today, we're going to profile this killer and certainly look at the boxes I've already marked. I've got my profiling book with all of these, and certainly we see abuse by the father, but then a really unusual twist, abuse by the victim of his mother and his sisters. Certainly, we've got mental health issues from a very early age. He was a loner. He did have poor academics, so we're checking those boxes also. We're certainly checking the animal abuse box, right? Ripping the wings off of birds. And we're going to get into, he has a number, and police don't even know what that number is. That's how large it is, of petty crimes that escalate, and go from purse snatchings to muggings to robbery, and finally evolving into murder. So the profiling from a background standpoint, when we look at their early life, when we look how they were raised, when we look at that nature and nurture, pretty easy, pretty straightforward with this one. He's checking nearly every box. Almost makes me think of Eileen Warhos, the
Mm-hmm.
serial killer we profiled, the prostitute who was killing men. Again, I think maybe one of the worst upbringings I've ever seen from a victimization standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And this killer quickly turns from victim to predator and is checking those boxes as a predator.
Well, and we mentioned the psychiatrist diagnosing him, the teacher predicting his future behavior. And then just a year after that, so in 68, John, he's committed to Moss Side Hospital as a psychopath, and he actually spends 4 years institutionalized, but then he is released or leaves, and then he starts using drugs. So
yeah, in 72, and then the crimes start, the crimes that I'm talking about start escalating significantly.
Yep.
72, 73, 74, 75. We know he's in London. He's out of London. He's in some suburban communities. We know his alcohol and drug use increases. But again, that's not uncommon with many of these guys. They know they have a problem.
Mhm.
They know they're on medication. If they can't get their medication, then they self-medicate, or they combine their medication with self-medication. But that's not what they need,
No.
right?
Right.
They need to be institutionalized where they're not going to hurt themselves or anybody else.
So go ahead. You started
Yeah, no,
talking about these petty crimes and different things, right? That we actually will not find out about until later on.
but we know they happened starting
Yep.
in 72.
Yep.
I really started escalating, let's say.
Okay.
We're not even sure. And I know that the law enforcement, after his arrest and adjudication, we're still looking at sprees of offenses that were committed prior to this.
Mhm.
When he wasn't institutionalized and he was going back and forth, that may be attributed to him. But let's start in 72. He's released from the mental institution, and police are picking up on a spree of muggings, thefts, robberies, handbag snatchings in very affluent areas like Chelsea and Knightsbridge and Belgrave and Belgravia, and most of them are targeting elderly women.
Yeah. So right now he's, like you said, 4 years old to, I believe, 92. So the victimology is all over the place. We're gonna be
Well,
talking about that. But right now he's targeting, I guess, John, because they're easy to take advantage of, easy to take a purse and run off. They're not gonna probably catch you. I mean, that's kind of what I envision and why he's targeting elderly women.
Yeah, I think it starts like that, right?
Yep.
Following an elderly woman home, grabbing her handbag and running.
Yep.
But then it starts turning into robbery, right? He's not just grabbing the handbag, he's knocking him down, he's hurting him. Then he's evolving even more. We see this escalating. So with some of the women, he starts to befriend them. Oh, I'm walking this way too. How are you doing? Have a great day. Let's walk together. Oh, do you want me to carry your bags? We've seen other serial killers do this, right?
Yep.
We've seen them set up their victims like this. Oh, how can I help you? Oh, come walk with me. What about the Russian serial killer? Oh, let's walk together and drink vodka, and we're going to go look at where I had to bury my poor dog, and we'll do a toast to the dog. It's amazing the ploys
Yep.
that these killers develop and use. So he started talking, right? You're walking from the store to your house, Brandy. He sees you. He sees you got a lot of handbags, and he's like, "Oh, can I help you? Can I help you carry him?" Because maybe he's tired of just running and grabbing. Then he walks you home, gets you in the house, and robs you of your belongings, and maybe not just whatever groceries he helped carry home, but jewelry, rings, other things. And as long as you don't make him mad, at least that's what we assume, because some victims said, well, no, he didn't get mad. Matter of fact, he was calm. He asked for a glass of water and he just
Mhm.
left after robbing me.
Yeah.
But we know
Interesting.
he escalates when they make him mad. So it was interesting to look at some of the police reports from that time because they were kind of all over. Again, didn't have a pattern. The only type of victimology might have been elderly women, but that was still a little bit up in the air. They weren't all 80-year-old women, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and it was hard to link a lot of these crimes, but in retrospect, I think they really kind of went back and looked and went, oh my gosh, not only did we have all those red flags as a young child, did we have the mental institution, did we have all of that, but we had these crimes that were occurring and never linked them together to a single suspect.
You talked about the escalation, right? So it doesn't take long for him to commit the first murder. He commits the first murder in 1973. And this Heidi is not elderly, John. She's 17 years old, and she is stabbed on a train near Catford and thrown out the door of the train. So he was suspected of this and eventually confesses to this after his arrest. But to me, these are the most scariest crimes, John. Just random acts of violence because someone is triggered. What do we know about Heidi's case?
Yeah, we know she was an au pair and she was going to work and she was on a train. And what we don't know is what triggered him. And just like when we go back and look at one of our latest episodes, Carl Watts, remember he would look in their eyes and if he saw what he said, evil in their eyes, he'd kill them. And he'd spend only seconds with them. But Heidi was on the train. There was some type of conflict. We don't know what it was. But he actually stabbed her and then threw her out of the door. And although there were witnesses, nobody really got a good look. Nobody had a good description. And police did not know about this murder as far as who did it. Until after he confessed.
So very random, scary, and the hardest to solve. Mary Hines, we don't know how old Mary was, but this happens in July of 1973. She is murdered in Kentish Town. The details of her case kind of match some of the unsolved cases. And then again, he confesses to this one after his arrest.
Yeah, and this is why you've got, so many times we see it. He ends up convicted of 3 murders. He confesses to 11. They suspect him in like 13 more. That's why these numbers are all over the place, Brandy, because when you have someone that confesses to the crime, then you can solve the crime, what we call close the case, right? You don't need to dig further, right? You don't need to go and get the evidence and find what you're not bringing them to trial. And so this is one of those that, again, was kind of a random one-off killing. Police didn't have a suspect. They didn't know that this individual was involved. And we see this when we sit down and these guys start confessing. They go, oh, yeah, well, and also in July, I didn't just do that one. You remember the one on the train. And authorities are like, yeah, oh my gosh, no, 2 weeks later, I also killed this female, and this is how I did it. So sometimes we don't have a lot of documentation on the cases because, quite frankly, we didn't need it. They're confessing, they're going to jail for life. But, I think it's just very interesting how some of these guys are willing to confess to everything and anything. Well, we have some that take it to an extreme. We have some, as we featured, that confess to ones they didn't do, and then that makes other serial killers mad because somebody was claiming their victim. But so many of these guys are willing to confess.
Well, we always talk about, like you said, Bundy used to ask for help, right? He pretend he has a broken arm to get people to help him. So everyone has a facade, right? They have their thing they do. We know he was charming. We know he was violent. He was addicted to violence. And he also said, I could not think what motivated me to do all those things, which I found very interesting too. Doesn't maybe know his own triggers or maybe just saying that. So what do we know about his facade, John?
Yeah, I think like a lot of these guys, he learned as he evolved, right? From the purse snatchings to, hey, maybe I'm going to get caught doing this. Somebody's going to scream. I'm going to do it at the wrong time. Somebody's going to see me. There's got to be a better way. And he started to evolve and put on a charming face. Hey, Brandy, let me help you walk you home. Let me make it, this is a bad area of town. I want to make sure you're okay. Oh, let me carry your bags for you. So you see, he had this face, right?
Right.
Because he was a psychopath. He had a face that some people would go, oh, wow, this is a nice guy. He's being helpful. He's being charming. And that would lure him into a sense of complacency,
Right.
And let me give you an example of that. He's walking you home. He's being nice to you. You get up to your front door. You should say, well, I'm so glad that you walked me home. It made me feel so much more comfortable. Just place the bags right here. I'm going to go inside and I'll come move them in a second.
That's right.
And then he's going to go, oh, no, I went this far. I'll help you carry me inside. No. My husband, what you should be saying, my husband, my boyfriend, my whoever is inside. We're really not big on letting strangers inside, or the place is, whatever you want to say. Don't let him pass the door.
I know.
Right.
I
Don't
know.
let him get past the door, because when he got past the door, all of a sudden, he wasn't that charming personality anymore. And if he saw the wrong thing in your behavior, like we found out later, victim said, I know I didn't make him mad. He was still very nice. And they lived to tell about it where others didn't. So this is a guy with violent outbursts that can turn on a dime.
Yeah.
And so, we always try to pass along somebody's helpful hints. 1, don't walk home with a stranger. 2, don't ever open your door to him. 3, don't ever let him in. We've seen this over and over. We certainly saw that with Rodney Alcala. He helped these women move into their apartments. Remember
That's
those
right.
cases in Los Angeles and New York?
Yeah.
And then would murder them. He helped them carry groceries inside the apartment. He was nice and charming and handsome, and he was a brutal murderer. So this killer does have a facade like so many other killers. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And today I'm enjoying our True Crime and Wine Red Blend, a dry red wine that has garnered a host of national and international awards and named one of the top Texas wines. It's a blend of our Primitivo and Graciano, and it pairs well with any pizza or pasta dish that you're making at home. And of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy while you're listening to our podcast than the True Crime and Wine Red Blend. Salute.
All right, so now we are in 1974, and there are more murders that we need to talk about. Stephanie Britton, white female, 57 years old, killed in January 12th, 1974. She's actually killed along with her grandson, who was 4 years old, Christopher Martin. He was suspected of this crime, John, and then confessed to this crime after his arrest. But in that same year, there was an unidentified homeless man that was killed. He was thrown off a bridge. And then he confessed again to this one after his arrest. So what do we know about the grandmother and grandson?
Well, first of all, look at this victimology. And this is what we talked about in the opening. It's all over the place. A 17-year-old au pair, and elderly women that are being attacked. And now we got a 57-year-old who certainly is in that category with her grandson, and he kills the grandson too. He throws a homeless person off of the bridge into the river. Police might never, ever have solved that one either. I mean, it's just such a random crime, but he confessed to it later. So from law enforcement standpoint, what I kept going back to and what I kept seeing in some of the research is we were having these petty crimes that evolved into robberies and muggings and really weren't connecting them. And now we're starting to have these random crimes on a train, in a bridge, in a home. I mean, it's really, really difficult, right? When there's no pattern to the victimology, very little geographic pattern, very little pattern to the murder itself, right?
Right.
We're already 5 murders into this, and he stabs some, he strangles some, he throws one off a bridge. From law enforcement standpoint, very hard to put these together and just kind of let's sit in their shoes for a minute. You have a murder that comes in on a train and you're going to put that in one place, and then you have another random murder coming in and nothing to connect them. No MO, no victimology, no witness, no suspect. Then you've got a grandmother and her grandson, totally different, right? Totally different characteristics from what you've seen in the past. Now you've got a homeless man who simply, did he fall off the bridge? Was he, drunk and passed out and, sitting on it and fell into the river? Did somebody force him to do it? So from a police perspective, really, really, really difficult to connect these crimes. And we don't know what's setting him off.
Right. That's the scary thing. Yes.
Yeah. And from a victim standpoint, you got to be terrified.
Yeah.
But I don't even know what potential victims to tell to be terrified, right? With my serial killer, we told the prostitutes, you guys are targets. He's going after you. Right.
Yeah.
In the pig farmer case, they would go to the indigenous women that were doing prostitution and lived in those areas and say, you're being targeted.
Yeah.
But in this case, the victims are all over the map.
Very disorganized. And again, hard to connect all of these. And we know that, like you mentioned, strangulation, stabbing, axe attacks, beating. So he doesn't have any kind of rhyme or reason to who he's choosing or why. And if he does, we don't know what that is. So very disorganized all over the place. And I can imagine this would have been very difficult for police.
Yeah. The only thing where we finally develop a pattern, and that helps to prove the cases in the end, is he does take souvenirs from the victims. Most of the time, it's in the form of jewelry. So finally, he's settling into a serial killer profile. Right? Because he's so all over the map in these other things. He does take souvenirs from the victims. But when we start going down the profiling checklist, he checks that charming category. We know he's befriending some of his victims, but he also checks the uncontrolled violence, flying into a rage. He doesn't have a preferred form of murder. Like most killers, he stabs some, he strangles some. Later on, we're going to see that, he kills one with an axe, stabs them with whatever is available. So now I'm starting to think Richard Ramirez type, he's not bringing these tools with him, not bringing, what he wants to use to kill him. He's finding it in the house or outside or close by, and he's using it. So now I'm getting into that. We know he's taking souvenirs. We know he's watching people because he'll come up and engage some, walk with some, charm some. We know something sets him into a rage, but he's not bringing the tools of the crime with him. He's not taking the tools of the crime. So I'm starting to see the appearances of a very disorganized killer, an opportunistic killer, a killer that flies into a rage and yet takes souvenirs from the victims. And of course, like most of them, has absolutely no remorse. And one of the things that we find out later on, and we see this pretty common with serial killers, when you ask them to talk about the crime, they don't just talk about the crime, Brandy. They relive it. They recall every aspect of it. And for many of these killers, they actually get turned on by it. They actually get turned on by recalling this. So as our profile is coming together today, pretty much early childhood, we checked all those boxes. Adolescence, we were checking a bunch of them. And then in his early years, and now as he's into his murder mode, we're seeing where these profiles are really coming together.
Well, and I'm also, and we'll talk about this a little bit when it comes to the geographic profiling of this. He's very comfortable in the home. He's very uncomfortable in other people's homes. It does remind me of Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez would just walk in someone's sliding glass door in the middle of the day, as their child's watching television and they're, doing the dishes. Just very comfortable. So we're going to talk about that. But John, this murders did not stop in 1974. We have Isabella Griffith, again, 84 years old, February 14th, 1974. Her door at her house had been forced open, and she was assaulted, strangled, stabbed in the chest, pinning the body to the floor. They know that the killer stayed in the house for a period of time. We see this as well. Again, very comfortable in there and listening to the radio.
Yeah. He
Unusual.
kills. He strangles, he assaults, he kills the woman, stabs her so violently with a knife so big. But honestly, Brandy, I'm thinking she's 84. She's probably fairly small, right? Fragile at this point. You grab just about any large kitchen knife, and I honestly could see where you can impale somebody to the point where they're actually pinned to the floor. So yeah, I could see that, but that really gets back into that opportunistic killer again. He, but this time, maybe she didn't open the door. Maybe she didn't let him in because we know the door was forced open. So maybe he asked, maybe he knocked, maybe he had been watching her, maybe he wanted to gain entry, worked himself up to a state and said, you know what? I'm just going to go in and do it. So very, very brutal killing right there.
Well, and he's also staying in the house and observing what he's done. And that's even creepier,
Yeah, I think he does that on a couple of these homicides, as a matter of fact. They know that he stayed in the house with the dead victim.
Yeah.
Again, really, really strange behavior, but behaviors that we've seen from many of these serial killers.
We also had another victim, John, in 1974, Frank Goodman. We don't know Mr. Goodman's age, but he was beaten to death with a metal bar over a pack of cigarettes. He then confesses to this crime after his arrest. And then we have a 92-year-old woman, Sarah Rodmell. This was in December of 1974, nailed her back door shut. So takes the time to nail the back door shut, strangles her, and places stockings in her mouth. And he says, and he confesses to this one as well after that arrest, and he says, easy as washing socks.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really chilling, especially in light of how he killed her by strangling her and stuffing the socks into her mouth. And then he uses his own analogy of, well, I was just washing a pair of socks. And I think that really gets into the mind of some of these killers. They're pure sociopaths. They care nothing about people. They have no remorse. They act on their urges, their impulsive urges, whether it's forcing the door open and stabbing somebody so brutally that you pin him to the floor, that you grab a metal bar, right?
Yeah.
And you beat somebody to death. And probably what was happening is, he made entry to the home again, wanted the pack of cigarettes, demanded the pack of cigarettes. The victim made him mad, maybe refused, maybe tried to fight him. But he was like, well, I'll just kill you. If you're not going to give in to my demands, I'll just kill you. And then with a 92-year-old, that's just absolutely disgusting. Takes the time to be in the house for a significant amount of time. And really, to him, it was murder. Murder to him, murdering this old woman was nothing more significant than washing his socks.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that gives me goosebumps, is just his
Total lack of
coldness,
remorse.
total lack of remorse,
No
easy as
empathy.
washing, no empathy, which, John, I will say, can be diagnosed at a very young age. Lack of empathy, lack of care, so again, some of those signs that were definitely showing in his younger
and he
age.
was. And
Yeah.
I think that's why at 15 they said, we think this guy's a psychotic killer. To me, again, I'm going back to it, and we see animal abuse a lot, but to me, it really struck a chord when I saw what he was doing, when he was tearing the wings off the birds, letting the birds suffer. It was about the pain. It was about the torture. It was about his own warped, demented sense of pleasure.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Okay, so before we get into 75, like he's all over the place with how he's killing them, who he's targeting, the geographic profiling is a little all over the place too. So what do we know? What are you picking up about this guy?
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's why police had such a difficult time. And thankfully, he was one of those killers that confessed to so many crimes and even discussed his prior crimes, the assaults, the robberies, the purse snatchings, because even though he felt comfortable with several of these people, especially the women in their homes, he committed these crimes in homes, on trains, on bridges, outside of cafes, in isolated areas, in wealthy neighborhoods. But he was also, as we say, very, very disorganized in the fact he would leave the weapons right there. He would find a tent peg and beat someone to death. He'd find a metal bar. He'd find an axe. And we're going to see where he does this. He'd push somebody off a bridge or throw him out of a train. So we see this very, very disorganized killer. But we also see that he likes collecting his souvenirs, especially jewelry and pens from his victims.
So now we're in 75, and we've got Adele Price and Ivy Davies, 48 years old. Ivy, February 1975, beaten with a tent peg in a cafe, in South End Cafe, and then again confesses after the arrest. What do we know about that? How did he get away with this? And seems a little bit strange.
Well, and that's the thing. In several of these cases, there were witnesses, and I didn't mention it, but in one of the cases, one of the victim's granddaughters saw him, and he actually said hi. Another victim, he asked for a glass of water. This happened in a cafe that was in public. The other one was on the train, but it's not like this guy is wearing a hoodie and glasses. And,
Right.
these attacks are so quick, they're so random. Witnesses simply are not getting great descriptions on this guy, and the police are not putting it together. Reminds me of a lot of crimes that we saw here in the 20s and 30s, before we had cameras everywhere, where the offender would walk up to the victim, kill him quickly, brutally, and walk away. But unfortunately, the witnesses were scared, traumatized, or didn't have great descriptions. And you come in as an officer, and Brandy, I've done this for years. It's amazing when you go into, especially, I remember one murder site I was at where a couple people were killed, many people were shot, and there were tons of witnesses. It was in a convenience store, a packed convenience store. And I started saying, okay, what the guy looked like. The descriptions were all over the place. He was a short, tall, fat, skinny, because in the chaos, in the people running, in the trauma of the moment, nobody really fixated on, wow, this is a white male, 6 foot, dark hair, blue jean shirt. We do get that sometimes, but to me, it seems on some of the most violent crimes and crimes that happen so quickly, we don't get great witnesses.
Well, and I think it's the trauma, right? I think it's is it fight or flight, right? Like your body goes into this, I got to get out of here, or what, so you're then worried more about yourself and getting out of the situation. And I just don't think people expect to have to witness something like that, right? And so maybe it takes a second to kind of figure out, get your bearings and figure out what just happened. So I'm not surprised multiple people would have different ideas about what this person looks like. But John, Adele Price, 1975, he forces his way into the apartment, strangles Adele, placed her in the kitchen before falling asleep in the armchair, and woke up by her granddaughter on the intercom, I guess maybe to get in, but he leaves before she's able to get inside.
Yeah, he actually leaves and passes her on the street, so she sees the guy that killed her grandmother. So this is one of the few cases that law enforcement not only had evidence on him, but had a witness and could tie everything together. But again, here's another one where he forces his way in an apartment. He's evolving. People aren't letting him in. He's not charming his way in anymore. He kills her, leaves her in the kitchen, and takes a nap.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah, in her armchair, before being awakened by the granddaughter, who ultimately finds her. So, he's spending time with these victims. He's killing them. He's then staying in their apartment. And I thought this was just incredible. Taking a nap and awoken by the granddaughter who's, hey, I'm buzzing my way in, just let you know, hey, I'm coming up. And he's able to make his way out of there and pass the granddaughter on the way out. So it's just amazing. And something like that, one-on-one, this kind of goes back, because this whole eyewitness thing is fascinating, right? Because people ask me about that all the time. Well, how come you didn't see him? How come, so-and-so was face-to-face with him? Well, in a calm situation, because the granddaughter doesn't know what just happened to her grandmother.
That's right.
So she passes a stranger, and she probably glances up and notices him. And he notices her, and she recognizes him and can describe him. But when we're in those chaotic scenes, like maybe in that cafe, on the train, on the bridge, where there's a lot going on, a lot of people, often, how many times have we heard, well, there's more than one shooter. There's two people involved. There's four people. And that's because you don't know what's going on. You don't know the role of all of these different people. Are they working together? Are they connected? Or are they simply in your line of sight and you're seeing multiple people. So, this whole eyewitnessing is really fascinating. And I've done before that old experiment where you're talking to a group and you have somebody come by and pass in front of them, and then you stop and say, did everybody see that? And almost everybody can acknowledge, I saw somebody, but their descriptions are totally different. It
It's
it is
fascinating.
fascinating. If you're a true crime lover and collect true crime t-shirts, wine glasses, stickers, hoodies, earrings, or other fashionable items, make sure you check out our True Crime and Wine logo apparel and more at shoptruecrime.com or at the Casaro Winery website, casarowines.com. So check out our True Crime and Wine selection of all kinds of collectibles and enjoy them as you listen to our podcast of True Crime and Wine.
Anything else you want to talk about when it comes to the profiling? We know the victimology is all over the place. The crime scenes are a little all over the place. Seems like he's very comfortable entering and visiting and staying at people's homes. We know he's taking trinkets and souvenirs with him of his victims. Anything else you want to talk about from a profiling perspective?
Yeah, I think we're seeing really a very clear profile of a disorganized killer. Right? He's opportunistic. He's looking for his victims. If he can no longer charm them, he's going to force his way in. He's very comfortable in killing, and death doesn't really mean a whole lot to him because he leaves them in the kitchen, or in the bathtub, and he stays around and he listens to the radio or even takes a nap. So I really think it's about the torture, about the fear, the look in their eyes, the feel of killing them. And he's just very, very comfortable with that. And again, the only kind of pattern that we're seeing evolve is his taking of souvenirs like jewelry and pens. That's what we're kind of noticing.
So now we're going to get to Father Crean, Father Anthony Crean, a priest killed in 1975 by an axe attack. It is confirmed that he was responsible for the murder of Father Crean. Crean was actually preparing for Easter, well known in the community for helping homeless people. I mean, he's a priest. I'm sure people came to visit him. MacKay had earlier stolen a blank check from Father Crean, forged his signature, and cashed it for about £80. So what do we know about this case?
Yeah, so here was another case where he not only charmed the victim, knew the victim a little bit, he actually knew Father Crean, right? Father Crean was helping him because he had this reputation for helping people out on the street. But MacKay stole the check and then forged it and cashed it and was caught. So he was actually captured and arrested by the police for this. And the court ordered him to pay it back. Right. Okay. And so I'm sure it was the thing where McCrean said, I don't want him to go to jail. Let him pay me back. I'll be whole. We'll be good. I'm using the money to do my ministry, to help homeless people that are in need. But instead of paying it back, MacKay breaks into his house. He stabs him and then kills him by striking him in the head with an axe. And then places his body in the bathtub, where he's discovered later by a nun who's looking for the priest and concerned about him because she hasn't heard from him in quite a while. So there's always a time when these killers slip up, when they make a mistake so egregious that it gives us the information, the evidence, the witnesses that we can really, really follow up on the case. MacKay's been sloppy the whole time, right? Leaving the
Right.
murder weapon there, passing the granddaughter, asking a victim for a glass of water and a drink. He's been sloppy the whole time. But now, after Father Crean's murder, officers start asking other priests. Do you know who McCree knew? Do you know who he was helping? Was there anybody that had a beef with him? Oh, yeah, there was. Remember this guy, MacKay? He stole from Father Crean, and he was ordered to pay back. And so officers now had something to go on. They now had MacKay tied to Father Crean because of their past relationship and the adjudication and the need to pay him back. So officers gather information that MacKay's living at a hostel and get permission to search his room. Because remember, the hostel is a temporary residence. The owner of the home, the boarding house, the hostel can give permission to search. All of that stuff we know. Officers search his room. He's not there. They search his room, and what do they find, Brandy? Remember that one downfall, that one very organized trait that I kept referring to? They found jewelry and souvenirs and items from not only the murder scenes, but burglaries going back to when he first started committing those. Remember the assaults and the muggings and the robberies? He had been keeping all of that stuff, as well as he had a ton of Nazi memorabilia in his hostel. So really kind of stuck out to officers, and they're looking for him. Where is he now? They learn he also stays in another house, and they go to arrest him, but he's not there. And my gosh, how many times has this happened? They know the suspect now. They're going to arrest him. They've got evidence, but he's not there. They're trying to find him, and MacKay follows a nurse home, and he robs her, but he doesn't kill her. Investigators later asked the nurse, why didn't he kill you? He killed all of these other victims. And what we gleaned from her was she said, well, you know what? I didn't make him mad. I kind of went along with it.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, again, this kind of killer is so scary. What if she said the wrong word, Brandy? What if she said a trigger word? What if she tried to fight back, or she tried to defend herself, or she tried to protect her property? Yeah, and Brandy, we as officers talk to citizens all the time about property. So whether you're a store owner, a shopkeeper, or, just in your home, if you have to acquiesce to some of these offenders, you got to remember it's only property. It's not something to lose your life over, right?
That's right. Yeah, that can be replaced. You cannot. And John, I do think from a human perspective, you have these people that he's befriending, right? And helping, and they let their guard down a little bit. And then all of a sudden they're surprised with his wanting to rob them or take something of theirs. And I don't know. Is it a natural reaction for you to go, no, you can't have that? Or how dare you, come into my home? And so maybe that is all it took. Just a little bit of back talk. And then he lost it.
Yeah. And so this nurse didn't. I mean, she told police, I didn't make him mad. He seemed fairly, comfortable, calm, and he turned and left. And when they started, talking to other people that were his victims, going back a significant amount of time, I think they started to recognize there was a pattern there. And although they may have never identified like they did with Watts, because he said, I saw evil in their eyes, and this offender didn't, although they may have never identified it. I think officers were pretty clear about if you didn't upset him, if he didn't get mad, he might be as likely to walk away as
Mm.
to hurt you. So now, just setting this up again, they go to the hostel, they find the evidence, they find his Nazi memorabilia, they go to this other house, he's not there, he's actually out attacking another woman, a nurse, lets her go, but police at this point are staking out the second house, as well as officers are at the hostel, and they arrest him in March of 75. Immediately bring him in, photograph him, fingerprint him, start running the fingerprints, and the fingerprints start coming back to several of these murder scenes. So now officers have jewelry that they found in his apartment. They find pens, they find souvenirs. They're now matching his fingerprints and go to him and say, listen, this is what we have, and he confesses, right?
He
As a
does.
matter of fact, he starts spilling his guts
Yeah.
and giving the police all kinds of details about the murders he's committed, but also about the robberies, the muggings, the thefts, all of that stuff. And so he really ties it up into a nice, neat little bow. The police were able to match his fingerprints with those found at the Price murder scene. So pretty strong evidence there. So there's two murders right there that they've already got him on. They're finding jewelry. They're finding silver fountain pens from other robberies that he's committed and other crime scenes. He takes detectives to an area where he threw one of the knives they used in another killing. And now police are just trying to match up all these murders, right?
Yeah.
They've got him on a couple. They've got him on three, basically, where they have not only his confession, but strong physical evidence, fingerprints, weapons, souvenirs from the crime scene, all of that. So they've got him on three, but now they're starting to look at all these other offenses because he's saying, yes, I killed a 17-year-old on a train. Yes, I threw a homeless guy off the bridge. And police are just absolutely astounded that this guy had been killing for so long in so many different ways, and yet they hadn't tied him to these crimes until he confessed.
Well, and how many times have we talked about the fact of, again, you have eyewitnesses, you have the ability to maybe find him. I think this is 1970s in, how many people are, how populated is this area? Are there other crimes that are being reported? I mean, it just runs the gamut with him. But he is confessing to more. He, like you said, he spills his guts and all of this. And then he eventually will go to trial in 75. So what happens at the trial?
Well, at first he pleads insanity, right?
Okay.
And look, with his history, he's got over a decade, right? Over a decade of evidence of being in and out of institutions, of committing crimes, of abuse, of everything. He's got, psychiatrists from, when he was 15 years old saying, we think this guy is a psychotic killer or going to be one. So he's got tons and tons of evidence. And he says, I'm insane. There's nothing you can do to me. But the experts come in and go, no, what we determine now is what we've been determining about you for the last decade and a half, that you're a psychopath, that you have personality disorders and not mental disorders. Again, Brandy, it always comes down to, when you plead insanity, did you know right from wrong? And he showed many times he knew right from wrong, nailing the door of the woman's clothes, pushing his way into the apartment. He knew that he was doing something wrong. And so the insanity defense didn't play. He finally, though, pled guilty with what's called diminished responsibility to the 3 counts that the police really had great evidence on. So Price, Griffin, and Father Crean, they had physical evidence. They could tie him to it. There was no doubt about if he did it. So he pled guilty to that. He was sentenced to life in prison and had to do a minimum of 20 years. He's served over 50 years now. His parole has been denied multiple times. He did win a partial little victory in 2017, getting out of a maximum security unit in the prison to more of a general population situation. Applied again in 2020 and was refused parole again then. And so he's been in prison for, over 50 years at this point, and something that was probably very well deserved, looking at the crimes that he committed, going back to a very, very young age. We see him committing offenses at 12, at 13, at 15, at 18, committing offenses through his 20s. We see him going from snatching purses to, mugging victims, to robbing victims, and finally murdering victims in a wide variety of forms. So this was a very unique, a very fascinating case, a very scary case if you're a victim living in the area, if you're law enforcement and you're trying to solve this kind of chaotic, psychopathic killer who really doesn't have a lot of patterns, who's looking at a wide victimology that kills in a number of different ways. But that's why we bring you these unique and fascinating cases like Patrick MacKay. Now, Brandy and I enjoy hearing feedback from all of the listeners out there. We get feedback quite frequently. You can always DM us on our social media channels at JJ True Crime and Wine on Facebook and Instagram. And certainly if you're on Apple, YouTube, iHeart, Spotify, like us, subscribe to it, give us some comments, give us some feedback. We always enjoy that, and we always encourage you to do it. So as we put a cork on this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners that, again, you can follow us on our socials. You can order wine at casarowines.com. And you can join us each and every episode as we profile killers that are unique and fascinating. So that kind of wraps up our business for today. And I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for making this show possible. And I invite you to join us on our next episode, where we're going to feature a serial killer who claimed it wasn't him. It was his alter ego that was responsible for the murders and dismemberment of his victims. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us for True Crime and Wine. Salute.